She doesn't belong with him. Those kids aren't his. Karen's voice cracked through the summer air like a siren. 10 minutes later, she was the one in cuffs. The man she called the police on? I'm the police chief. And today was the day she picked the wrong family to mess with. It was a Tuesday. The kind of peaceful, sun-drenched morning that makes you believe the world's still okay. My daughters were sitting in the driveway with buckets of sidewalk chalk, their little fingers dusted with pink and purple powder. They were drawing a giant sunflower with glitter glue smiles and giggles, while I trimmed back some overgrowth from the rose bushes. I'd just taken the week off, first one in months, just to be with them. No calls, no emails. Just pancakes, cartoons, and the smell of freshly cut grass. At least, until Karen stormed into the picture like a caffeine-fueled banshee on a mission. She marched right up to the edge of our yard, her purse swinging like a weapon, oversized sunglasses perched on her nose like a villain from a midday soap opera. She didn't look at me, didn't greet the girls. She actually pointed, at my daughters and said, "Those children cannot be unsupervised on HOA property." I blinked. "They're in our driveway," I said slowly, confused. "That's our house. That's our chalk. That's our sunflower." Karen scoffed. "And yet they're still breaking Rule 14A. Children under the age of 10 must be within 6 feet of a legal guardian at all times." I looked down. The girls were maybe 8 feet away. I glanced back up. "You measured that in your head, did you?" Her nostrils flared. "I'll be reporting this to the HOA. You clearly don't know the standards we uphold here. This is a respectable neighborhood." I wiped a bead of sweat off my forehead. "Karen, I live here. I've lived here for 4 years. My name's on the welcome plaque." Her voice got louder. "It's about the safety of the children. For all I know, you're just some..." And she stopped. Her eyes narrowed at me like she was trying to build a narrative mid-sentence. "Are those even your kids?" That was when it clicked. She wasn't here for a conversation. She was building something. A story? A complaint? A report? I took a slow breath. My daughters had gone quiet now, watching from behind their chalk masterpiece. I saw the concern already blooming in their eyes, and that hit me in the gut harder than anything she could say. I walked a little closer to the edge of the yard. Calmly. No raised voice. "Yes, Karen. They're mine. Is there a problem you'd like to report?" She smirked and pulled out her phone. "Actually, yes. I'll be calling the authorities. Right now. 2 young girls in the company of a man who refuses to prove he's their guardian? I have a duty to protect the neighborhood." I opened my mouth, then shut it. There wasn't any point. She was already dialing. I heard her fake panic leak into the phone. "Yes, I'm at Oak Ridge Court. There's a suspicious man with 2 young girls. No, he's just staring at me. The girls are drawing things on the ground, but they look distressed. Please hurry." She hung up, triumphant. "See how fast things happen when someone actually cares?" I didn't reply. I simply walked into the house. My heart was steady, but I could feel the tension mounting. I knew exactly what was about to happen, and how dangerous her little stunt could become if mishandled. I set down my hedge clippers, wiped the dirt from my hands, and opened the top drawer of the kitchen cabinet. My badge sat there beside my service weapon and a set of worn cuff keys. I took the badge and slipped it into my back pocket. When I stepped back outside, the sound of sirens was already echoing through the cul-de-sac. A black and white patrol cruiser rolled up, tires crunching gravel. 2 officers stepped out. One had his hand near his belt, scanning the scene. The other approached with a cautious posture. I didn't blame them. They were responding to what they'd been told was an active child endangerment call. Karen rushed forward like she was the 3rd deputy. "That's him," she hissed, pointing directly at me. "Those are the girls. I don't know what he's told them, but they don't belong here." The lead officer stepped between us. "Sir, can I see some ID?" I nodded. "You can." I reached slowly into my pocket and handed him my badge. He glanced at it, paused, then blinked hard. He looked at the other officer, then back at me. You're Chief Denton? Last I checked, I replied. Karen's mouth dropped. Wait. Chief? Of what? I looked at her, voice even. County police. And those girls? That's my family. You just filed a false report involving minors. The silence that followed could have filled a courtroom. Karen stammered. I didn't know, he wasn't wearing, there was no. You didn't ask, I said quietly. You assumed. You made a dangerous, reckless assumption and involved my daughters. The younger officer spoke up now. We have this all on bodycam, sir. We can file the paperwork immediately. Karen's eyes widened. You're not actually arresting me? I was trying to help. I could have let it go. I could have taken the high road. But then I looked at my daughters, still sitting there silent, clutching their chalk like it was the only thing keeping them grounded, and I made a decision. I want her trespass, I said. She's not to come near my property again. And I'll be filing a report with Internal Affairs and HOA Council. This isn't over. Karen was still trying to defend herself as the officers guided her away. I didn't care. The damage was done. But so was the denial of her power. She came to my home thinking she had the upper hand. She left in the back seat of a cruiser. I bent down and ruffled the girl's hair. You two okay? One of them looked up and asked. Is she going to jail? I paused. Maybe. Maybe not. But she won't be coming back. The other one whispered. We didn't do anything wrong. No, I said, pulling them both into a hug. You didn't. And you never will, no matter what someone like that says. That night, I didn't sleep much. Not because I was shaken, but because I was planning. Karen wasn't done. She had connections. She tried to weaponize the system, and that meant she knew how to play deeper games. But so did I. And I had just started mine. The next morning brought no apology, no silence, and no retreat. Instead, Karen doubled down. Her porch lights were flashing like it was the 4th of July, and a paper sign had been zip-tied to her mailbox reading, Neighborhood under surveillance. It was crooked, printed in Comic Sans, and entirely unapproved by the HOA. That irony was almost impressive, but it wasn't funny anymore. I'd let her walk away with a warning, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized she hadn't been acting on impulse. She'd had a plan. The way she phrased that 911 call, the way she pointed and twisted words, wasn't something people invent in the heat of the moment. It had structure. She had practice. I started asking around. My first stop was Marcus, who lived 2 doors down and had served with me in the reserves a decade ago. He'd moved here with his son after his wife passed. When I asked if Karen had ever bothered him, he let out a dry laugh and reached for a folder in his kitchen drawer. Inside were 11 printed notices, all signed by Karen, all unofficial and all ridiculous. One fined him for a windshield. Another warned him about excessively aggressive sprinklers. He'd kept them not because he respected them, but because they were so absurd he didn't believe anyone else would. Then he leaned closer and told me the thing that made my stomach tighten. Karen had once, strongly suggested, to him that his son, who had autism and sometimes stims with loud noises, might be better off in a more specialized neighborhood. That wasn't just nosy. That was calculated cruelty. I kept going. The Harrisons, 2 retirees across the street, said Karen once called animal control on their therapy cat because it walked too confidently. The Wilsons, who just had a baby, said Karen sent them a printed chart of acceptable decibel levels for crying infants. One neighbor even claimed Karen had threatened to report a teenage babysitter for solicitation, because she saw the girl walking a stroller and didn't recognize her. All of these were stories people shared quietly, almost shamefully, as if they'd been waiting for someone to believe them. Karen hadn't been annoying, she had been a menace. And the HOA? Well, they weren't much better. Technically, Karen wasn't even an elected board member. But she had installed herself as the community standards liaison, A title that didn't exist in the charter. The actual board let her do it because, as one member admitted to me off the record, it was easier to let her handle the drama. So they let her file complaints, send notices, even knock on doors, all while pretending she had no real authority when things went wrong. She was the unofficial sword of a cowardly council. And now she was swinging that sword at families. Back home, I sat on the porch watching my daughters play in the yard again. They seemed lighter today, maybe because Karen hadn't shown her face in a few hours. But I could feel the storm brewing beneath the surface. People like her didn't back off. They waited. They circled. I needed to find the route before she came back swinging. That's when I remembered the call log. I had access. I logged into the city system and pulled the recording from yesterday. I listened to it twice. Her tone was strained but clear, her accusations precise. She never once said my name, never said she knew who I was. Just, a man, 2 little girls, and, something's not right. She never said there was danger, just enough ambiguity to spark urgency. That's a pattern. I cross-referenced the numbers she called from and found 2 more past complaints in our district, one against a school bus driver, one against a soccer coach. Both reports were anonymous but had the same phrasing: uncertain male, children distressed, unfamiliar activity. Both had been closed without action. Both came from calls made during the same hour of day, both within 5 miles of our neighborhood. That wasn't coincidence. That was someone testing limits. And then, like a punch in the chest, something landed in my inbox. A red flag notice from Child Protective Services. It had been automatically forwarded to me as the on-call department liaison. I shouldn't have been on the list anymore, but the system hadn't updated since my recent vacation status. The report was about me. Anonymous tip. Children possibly living with a guardian who may not be biological parent. Frequent yard activity. Possible lack of supervision. Recommend welfare check. I stared at the screen, the cursor blinking like a taunt. She'd done it. Karen had filed a false report against me, with CPS. I drove straight to the department. No calls, no texts. Just walked in, showed my badge, and requested to speak with Director Palmer. She was a straight shooter, had worked in family services for 15 years, and had a reputation for zero tolerance when it came to system abuse. I explained what happened. She looked up the report, eyes narrowing. When she read it, her fingers froze over the keyboard. This isn't her first one, she muttered. She's filed 6 in the past year. All anonymous, all vague, all targeting families with one common trait: they all stood up to her about something. My voice dropped. What happened with the other families? She sighed. Most were investigated, then cleared. But one mother panicked and voluntarily placed her son with relatives. We didn't know it was Karen then. Her name's not tied to the tips. Can it be? I asked. She nodded slowly. Give me 24 hours. By the time I got home, my porch light had been unscrewed. Petty. Predictable. And when I walked out back to feed the dog, I found a plastic flyer taped to the fence that read, "This house is under watch. Report any concern to HOA." My daughters were asleep inside, unaware. And for their sake, I smiled and carried on with the chores. But in my mind, a clock had started ticking. She wanted war. But I had the law. And I wasn't going to just defend my home. I was going to dismantle her whole operation brick by brick, file by file. The next morning, I brewed a fresh pot of coffee, slipped on my old department polo with the patch over the heart, and called in one simple favor. The HOA had an open meeting that evening. I was going. Not as a neighbor. Not as a father. But as the police chief. And I wasn't going to raise my voice. I was going to raise the truth. The community hall had never seen that many people. Folding chairs creaked beneath skeptical neighbors, many of whom hadn't been to a single HOA meeting in years. The room buzzed with nervous energy, not because anyone expected a peaceful gathering but because word had spread fast. Something about Karen. Something about the police chief. Something about everything finally coming to a head. I stepped inside wearing my badge on my belt and a department polo, but I kept the jacket over it until I took my seat. No grand entrance. No announcement. Just a quiet presence in the second row, right behind the table where the so-called board sat nervously shuffling paperwork and whispering to each other. Karen wasn't there yet. But I knew she'd arrive. She needed the stage. And like clockwork, the door flung open 10 minutes late and in she walked, carrying a manila folder and wearing a smugness that didn't quite fit the anxious tone of the room. She took her seat at the head of the table like she was running the show. A few neighbors rolled their eyes, others sat straighter. The HOA chair, a timid man named Glenn, cleared his throat and tried to start the meeting with the usual nonsense about lawn trimming guidelines and water conservation alerts. But I raised my hand before he got to the second line. Glenn blinked at me. I didn't wait to be called on. My name is Chief Denton, I said, standing. And I need to address the board and this community regarding a series of recent events that involve coordinated harassment, falsified complaints, and abuse of power, none of which are authorized by this HOA's charter. The room went quiet. Glenn stammered, This isn't really the format. It is now, I said plainly. Karen straightened, face flushed. This is harassment. I don't know why we're entertaining. I cut her off without raising my voice. You filed a false police report about my daughters and me. You used language intended to spark a welfare response and escalate suspicion. You've done it before, multiple times, to multiple families. Karen's mouth opened, but I kept going. In the last 12 months, you've submitted more than 30 informal notices to residents, none of which are backed by any legitimate HOA enforcement authority. You've targeted veterans, single parents, elderly couples, and children. You've forged titles, created roles for yourself, and intimidated people using threats of CPS and law enforcement. In one case, you caused a parent to temporarily lose custody. In my case, you filed an anonymous report to Child Protective Services. Unfortunately for you, I'm the department liaison. I received the alert myself. She stood up now, fists clenched. I was doing what I thought was right for the children. You're twisting this. This is defamation. I met her eyes. What you did is a crime. Multiple, in fact. Filing false reports. Impersonating an authority figure. Harassment. Retaliation. And what's worse, you used the HOA's name as cover. The board allowed you to operate because you were convenient. But that ends today. I stepped aside and nodded to the back of the room. The door opened and in walked Director Palmer from CPS, along with 2 internal affairs investigators from the city. They didn't say a word. They didn't need to. Their presence alone sent a ripple through the room. Karen's voice shrank to a whisper. You set me up. No, I replied. You did that all by yourself. I just stopped letting you hide behind clipboards and loud opinions. Director Palmer walked forward and placed a folder on the board's table. This is a summary of every anonymous child welfare report tied to this address and phone number. We've traced digital footprints, and we have witness statements. Ms. Campbell. She looked directly at Karen. You've manipulated our system. And you almost tore apart families doing it. Karen turned to the board. You're going to let them talk to me like this? After all I've done for this neighborhood? One board member, a woman who'd always sat silently in the corner during meetings, finally spoke up. What you've done is embarrass us. You made us complicit in your power trips. I motion to remove Ms. Campbell from any and all association with this board. Another member immediately seconded. Glenn looked like he was trying to shrink inside his own shirt collar. All in favor? Every hand went up. Except Karen's. You can't vote me out. You don't have the authority, she shouted. Director Palmer responded coldly. No, but we have the authority to remove you from the community entirely if necessary. You'll be receiving formal notice soon. Karen grabbed her things, furious, but no one moved to help her. She stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. Nobody followed. Nobody defended. A few neighbors even clapped quietly, the relief on their faces like fog lifting from the valley. I turned back to the board. For the record, I'm not here to take over. I'm here because someone had to stop the rot. But I'll be monitoring what happens next. And I'm not the only one. Glenn nodded stiffly. Understood, Chief. Thank you. The meeting ended early. Some people lingered to talk. Others hurried home, finally believing that maybe, just maybe, things might start to get better. I walked home under the fading light, the quiet of dusk more peaceful than it had been in weeks. When I got to the porch, my daughters were there waiting with popsicles and a new chalk mural, this one of a badge and a heart drawn side by side. I sat down between them, stretched out my legs, and finally exhaled. One of them asked if the mean lady was gone. I told her yes. The other asked if we could go back to drawing in the driveway without anyone yelling. I smiled and said we never stopped. They just needed to know their dad was always watching. Later that night, as the neighborhood lights dimmed and a cool breeze swept through the trees, I saw a moving truck pull up in front of Karen's house. Whether it was symbolic or real, I didn't care. The point was clear. She was done here. And in her place? Peace. Real peace. Not the kind enforced by threats or fake rules, but the kind that grows when the loudest voice in the room finally shuts up, and the people who'd been silent start to speak again. The kind of peace a good neighborhood deserves. And the kind my daughters could finally grow up in.